Hello, today is the 6th of March, the day of Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's final budget before the next general election. So joining me today to talk over the budget and talk about a bit of history is Labour MP Ben Bradshaw. Welcome to People and Politics. Ben Bradshaw, thank you very much for coming on the show today. It's really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you. And of course, we meet on the day of the the budget. What could be, and many of us hope was the last budget before the general election. Did you sit through the whole thing and have
No,
comments?
I didn't. I didn't. I'm afraid. I'm not too keen on these big set piece events. I don't think they really throw an awful lot of light on what's really happening below the surface and what's really going on in people's lives. They're just another opportunity for politicians to have a bit of a knockabout. Um, uh, and I suppose also because I'm stepping down at the next election, I thought, well, I'm not going to be around to having to clear up any of this mess. So I didn't really need to focus on the detail on the day. But it seemed like a bit of a damp squib to me, to be honest.
Yeah, there wasn't very much that I thought, well, that's it. No, I sat down to watch it, and I managed to last about 20 minutes, and I couldn't stomach anymore. And but it was a bit of a nothing, as you said,
Yeah.
and as I said, hopefully it will be the last before the election. And I didn't realize that you were stepping down at the next election, but you've done a pretty good shift from 1997 up until now. That's a pretty long shift, and so how's that been?
Oh, it's been amazing, and it's been a huge privilege and an incredible experience. I was lucky enough to be a minister for 9 years under the Blair Brown governments, and I won the seat from the Conservatives in 1997. So I wasn't really expecting to still be here after such a long time because I assumed that, as happens in most constituencies, after a while it would swing back again to the other party. But we've managed to hold on and build up a good majority there, and um, yes, I mean the last few years have been a bit frustrating in opposition, to be honest. I mean, you never come into politics to be in opposition because you can't really do very much. I mean, you can achieve things for your individual constituents, and if you're lucky and single-minded, you can achieve some little things around the edges of issues, but you don't have the chance that you have in government to really make big, meaningful change. Um, so yeah, it's been a huge privilege, and I look forward to cheering Labour on at the next election and hoping they win, and hopefully doing a good job once they do win.
Yeah, I was just thinking you've probably been in opposition for about the same time that you were in government, and I'm guessing government's better.
It's definitely better. When you're in opposition, all you do is wake up in the morning and think, what am I going to say today? Whereas if you're in government, you wake up every morning and say, what am I going to achieve or deliver today? And you're right. I mean, I've actually now been in opposition a bit longer than we were in government. We were in government for 13 years, weren't we? And it's been 14 years now of the Tories. And when I look back on some of the things that we did in that Labour government, getting waiting times right down in the NHS, and leaving the NHS with the highest patient and public satisfaction ever, reducing poverty, reducing inequality, really, really good investment in schools and improvement in pupil outcomes, all the kind of anti-discrimination and equality legislation for LGBT people, women, disabled people, the Equality Act, so much good stuff that we did in government, and it feels as if we've gone backwards in the last 14 years, and a lot of that good work's been undone.
Yeah, as you're talking there, I thought, sadly, it feels like all the work's been unpicked, particularly around equality, LGBT rights, unfortunately, the arguments for trans people, it's so sad how they've become.
Oh, it's really, really distressing. And it's funny for me because when I stood in 1997 for Labour in Exeter, I was the first openly gay MP to be elected who'd stood as an openly gay candidate for selection. And my Conservative opposition was a big homophobe. He ran something called the Conservative Family Campaign, whose main reason for existing was to campaign against LGBT rights. And he ran a very homophobic campaign, and I beat him, and I beat him very, very well. And then we had all that fantastic progress throughout the Labour years, and actually carried on under Cameron, who put through gay marriage, and actually Theresa May. But ever since then, under Johnson, Truss, and Sunak, it's gone back very badly. And the transphobia that's deliberately being fomented by some politicians and in large sections of the mainstream media, actually, as well, a lot of our journalists who should know better, is not only causing real alarm and distress to a tiny and very vulnerable minority, but it's doing us harm internationally, doing our reputation as a country, as a leading country for equality and human rights harm. And it's being noticed around the world. And I hope one of the things that Labour will do when it gets back in is improve the quality of our public discourse, and talk about treating people with dignity and respect, rather than picking on minorities and using them as scapegoats to try to detract attention from one's own dismal failures.
Yeah, so the you know what might have been the catalyst or the trigger for the sort of backward steps? Because as you say, David Cameron's government was quite pro-LGBT, they introduced gay marriage. But what you say, what was it then that caused Johnson and Truss to go backward?
I think it's a combination of things. I think the Tory party, a few people would dispute this, has drifted further and further to the right under successive leaders now. I mean, the Tory party now is not the Tory party that people voted for in 2015 or even 2019. I think coupled with that, when the economy is doing very badly and people are really hurting, and people's real living standards have been falling now for a number of years after decades of sustained improvement. We know from history that when people are suffering and when the economy is bad, that irresponsible and opportunistic politicians will often try to blame minorities for those problems, whether they be asylum seekers or Black people or LGBT people. And I think that's what some opportunistic and reckless politicians have been doing. I also think there's an element to which a lot of people hadn't really focused on what Labour achieved in government with the Equality Act. And trans people have never really been very visible. They're such a small minority, and they lived in fear for so long. But the Equality Act has given them, for the first time, real protection against discrimination. And I think that's led them to come out of the shadows and say, look, we're here. And I think some people have felt, to be honest, unsettled by that, because a bit like it was, 30 years ago with gay people, a lot of people had never met a gay person. They didn't know any gay, or thought they hadn't. They probably had, but thought they hadn't. But once they got to know gay people and knew that there were gay people in their own families and circle of friends, that changed their attitudes. And I think it's the same with trans people. We've got to fight those battles all over again and demystify the whole thing. So I think it's a combination of things, but I'm hopeful that we will get there in the end. But it's very sad and very upsetting, and is damaging a lot of people's lives because a lot of trans people and their allies feel very anxious about what's going on, and I've been one of those MPs who's been trying to support them in my last few months in Parliament.
Yeah, sure. Well, would you agree that the Conservative Party, they seem to survive on dividing people? And as you say, when the chips are down in the economy, when people's living standards are lower than they've been for generations. So
Yeah.
to detract from people talking about that, they try and divide people by talking about either trans rights or immigration. The thing that really galled me in December is the amount of hours and parliamentary time that was given to the migrants in Rwanda, which adds up to a minute number of people, even in the whole immigration, as a drop in the ocean. But
I think that's the criticism that we have of the Rwanda scheme, that even if it works, it's so expensive and will involve such a tiny number of people, and the government, as you say, has expended so much bandwidth and spent a lot of public money on this rather than tackling the bread and butter issues that the Home Office has to face. A department which has failed consistently to meet its targets on dealing with applications and processing applications and deporting those people who are found not to have a legitimate claim. So yes, I think it's a smokescreen to try to disguise failure.
Yeah, it's just a distraction from things that really matter, and people are not being able to afford the bills and afford to put food on the table, and the dismal failure of the government. As was, I've read briefly about Richie's speech on Friday evening, which I thought was just pathetic.
Pointless. What was the point of it?
That's the only word I think that was pathetic. It really was. And the thing that made me most angry about it is, he was talking about the powers of hate and the force of it. And I think, take a long hard look at the last few months of your government and look at the hate and the bile and the stuff that is poured out of your department,
Yeah.
It just made me furious.
There was one positive I thought that came out of it, and I agree with you. It was totally unnecessary, and it did seem bitterly ironic that he was making this speech the week after he'd had to suspend the whip from his own former party vice chairman for Islamophobia, but couldn't quite call it what it was, Islamophobia. But at least he did, for the first time, talk about Islamophobia, which he's avoided doing before. He always talks about anti-Semitism, and rightly so, because there's been a huge increase in anti-Semitism since the Gaza conflict. But he's often avoided talking about Islamophobia. Indeed, the Conservative Party is the only party that hasn't signed up to the internationally recognised definition of Islamophobia. But he did talk about Islamophobia, or maybe he used a different term, anti-Muslim hate. But that was progress. But it was a completely unnecessary publicity stunt, and we all thought he was going to call a general election. We all got very excited.
Well, everybody got excited. I got excited, but no such luck.
Yeah.
So you were part of the intake in 1997 when Tony Blair came on the big landslide, and although everybody talking about Labour doing well, this year, and I hope to do. And do you think we're where do you think Labour are where they were in 1997?
Well, it's very difficult to compare one moment in history with a moment in history, sort of, nearly 3 decades ago. I mean, certainly, if you look at the opinion polls are looking very healthy for Labour at the moment. But I think they disguise a very different public mood from the one we had in 1997. I think the public are now so disillusioned and so fed up with politics and all politicians after the failures of the last 14 years. And of course, the Conservatives and the Conservative newspapers are trying to persuade people that all politicians are the same. Whereas before 97, I think there was a real enthusiasm and optimism about the prospect of a Labour government. I think now people are thinking, well, we want to change, we'll give them a go. And in a funny way, I think that kind of fits in with Keir Starmer's personality, because he's not a showman, he's not charismatic. He's a competent, steady, strategic achiever, very hardworking, who will get the job done. But I think he's not the kind of person who's going to make lots of grandiose promises. And in a way, I'd rather he didn't. I'd rather we under promised and promised very little, win the election, and then deliver more in government and show people that we can make a difference. And by doing that, not only hopefully will we win a second term, but also help rebuild the trust in politics in general, which has been so badly damaged.
Sure, yeah. If Rachel Reeves had been delivering today's budget, and have we any idea how would have been different, what her policies would she have brought in?
Well, I don't feel qualified to write Rachel Reeves' budget now, or even the budget that hopefully she will deliver after the next election. And I think she will be very careful about spelling out that in too much detail. But she spelled out some very important principles around fiscal responsibility and debt and bringing it down, not borrowing for day-to-day spending and so forth. But I think you will see significant differences in a Labour approach. I mean, there was nothing in today's budget about growth or productivity. That's how you both increase living standards and enable yourself to spend more money on public services, which are on their needs. Investment in vital infrastructure that the country needs in the new green economy, for example, I think is another thing that you'll see Labour doing much more on. And I think our decisions over tax will be much better calibrated. I mean, I understand from my first reading of today's budget is that the people who've benefited most from this although overall the tax burden has increased, are not the least well off, not the poorest workers, but the people in the middle. And I think with Labour, you'll see more attempt to make sure that those at the bottom also get treated fairly. I think so. But the problem, is, and Rachel and Keir face a lot of demands for people to say more about what they will do and be more radical. The difficulty, and you saw this today, is that when we announce a good policy like the non-doms, the Tories nick it. Yeah. So you don't want to announce all your good policies in advance, and certainly not before the election is called, because there's always a danger that the Tories will nick them, and then you have to find something else to raise the revenue. So I suspect Rachel's keeping her best rabbits, if you like, in her hat until the election is called, when it will be too late for the Conservatives to nick our policies.
Yeah, I thought it was quite funny last night because they leaked to the press last night that they were getting a 2 pence cut in national insurance, and so the president today maybe he's got another rabbit in the hat. But it doesn't appear to have had.
No, he didn't. He didn't appear. There was no. I mean, I can't remember a budget that didn't have a kind of a rabbit or any kind of surprise to tickle the fancies of the government back benchers. And of course, in the olden days, leaking what was in the budget in advance was a resignation offence. But no one seems to take any notice of that anymore. And the Chancellor, leaked the fact that national insurance was going to be cut by 2 points, and no one batted an eyelid, which is quite. And I hope one of the things that Keir does, if he does become prime minister, is he rebuilds some of that some of those conventions of decent behaviour in government and by politicians, and taking Parliament seriously and not announcing everything to your friendly newspapers beforehand.
Yeah, sure. I think as soon as Richard Sunak came in, the first thing he said was, "I'm going to restore decency and honesty," and he is obviously forgotten. He
Yeah,
said, "Yeah,
yeah,
that's how I think it's done."
yeah.
So, and I suppose finally, do you think Richard will make it to the office? Everybody got excited on Friday because we thought that was it, announcement. Do you think he'll try and hang on to that autumn?
Oh yes, I've always thought, in spite of all the speculation that Sunak would want an autumn, if not a January election, heaven forbid. Partly because I think he's quite a vain man, and he wants to see 2 years on the prime ministerial ledger. It looks better than one, doesn't it? I also think that all governments, when they are facing defeat and a long way behind in the polls, hang on in the hope that something might turn up. There might be some crisis, a Trump victory or a Russian invasion of Eastern Europe that might, for some reason, help the government. Some terrible scandal involving Labour. You never know what's going to happen. But nothing they're doing so far seems to be working, and I don't think this budget will. And I've always been of the view that it's to the Conservatives' advantage to have an election after the clocks go back in the autumn, because they don't really have any volunteers on the ground. They don't have activists really. They depend for their support on super rich donors, whereas the Labour Party has an army of volunteers across the country who go out and knock on doors and deliver leaflets and so forth. And that's obviously much more difficult to do in the cold and the dark and the wet. I remember the 2019 election, we were all going around with head torches and waterproofs, and it was a nightmare. So I've always thought, that the cynic and Sunak would A, want to do 2 years, and B, want to have an election late October, November, December, or January. I'm afraid we've got some months to wait, unless the Tories completely implode and bring him down before then.
Well, you never know what can happen, and but it's gonna a long wait, because the sooner the better, as far as many of us are concerned. But Evan, Ben, thank you so much for joining me today and doing this podcast with me. I'm very grateful.
It's been lovely to talk to you, David. It really has. And where are you talking to me from?
I'm in Edinburgh.
Oh, you're in Edinburgh. Wonderful city. My husband is from Edinburgh, so I know the city quite well. Is that an Edinburgh landscape you've got in the background there?
It's a small town called Haddington. Where?
Oh, I know Haddington very well. My husband's auntie lives there.
I grew up in Haddington.
Lovely. Well, that's in the constituency that Douglas Alexander is hoping to win, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. He's standing.
Yeah.
But it'd be great if he gets back into.
Oh, it'd be fantastic. It'd be fantastic.
It's a real talented guy in there.
Yeah.
Very good. So
lovely.
And of course, my MP is Ian Murray.
Oh, Ian's a great guy. Yeah, our sole Labour man flying the flag. I had that, well, not as badly as Ian, but I was the only non-Conservative MP southwest of Bristol for the 2015-2017 Parliament, and that felt quite lonely.
Well, hopefully after the election there'll be a few more Scottish.
Yeah, I agree. No, that's very exciting. I'm very excited about that.
Scottish Labour MPs, because there's SNP MPs right now.
I know. Anyway, David, nice to talk to you. Take care.
You too. Thank you so
much.
All right.
All the best. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.